This is the artificial intelligence voice of Mikhaila Peterson narrating this pod-slice summary of the Mikhaila Peterson podcast. A conversation between Mikhaila Peterson and Jonathan Pageau begins with their thoughts on popular children's content creators like Disney, critiquing the lack of quality in their writing, which they perceive to be ideologically driven. They move into discussing the impact of social media on society over the past decade, observing the speed at which woke ideologies have spread due to their increased visibility online. Pageau explains how the online world can reinforce singular perspectives by creating echo chambers, where individuals are constantly surrounded by others who share and support their views. They both express concerns about the ease with which people can now be manipulated through social media and share their personal methods for avoiding this, emphasizing the importance of questioning narratives and trying to see situations from various perspectives. He just shares an anecdote about attending the trucker protest in Ottawa, recounting how his firsthand experience clashed with the media's portrayal of the event. He reflects on similar experiences with media dishonesty in the past, including the misrepresentation of Mikhaila's father, Jordan Peterson. Both speakers expressed distrust in conventional media, predicting their eventual decline due to their inability to adapt to current societal trends. The conversation then moves to American politics, and they discuss Kennedy's stand on the polarized political climate as a middle ground figure, calling for moderation from both ends. Pageau gives an analysis of the current situation. He thinks it might be too late for a centrist figure to prevent further polarization because the ideological pendulum appears to have gained too much momentum. He provides the controversial transgender issue as evidence of the chasm between the left and right. The speakers indicate that the intensity of conflicting beliefs on such critical issues makes it difficult for any meaningful compromise to emerge. The dialogue continues to delve deeper into the perspective of human morality, goals, and increasingly problematic societal polarization. According to Pageau, the ongoing divisions may be aggravating a latent desire for war, not for the devastation it would bring, but as a common enemy that could foster unity. They discuss the idea of endorsing common causes such as environmental issues to promote global unity. However, it's questioned if these causes are substantial enough to unify fractured societies or whether they serve as a distraction from the actual issues at hand. Pageau brings up the concept of a common transcendent goal that all humans could aim for, like religious people do with the concept of God. Using God as a common point of attention tends to offer a sense of unity. However, this doesn't always work considering the diverse and often conflicting nature of religious beliefs. This issue is further complicated when trying to communicate this concept to agnostics or atheists who might struggle with understanding the notion of a higher power. To bridge the gap, Pageau talks about the idea of the Platonic good, ineffable that transcends personal desires. He suggests that people tend to become enslaved by anything they identify as the ultimate good, whether it be personal success, safety, or pleasure. These goods can easily turn into tyrants ruling over one's life. Instead, he advocates for the existence of something beyond our current focus, an ultimate good that cannot be fully understood or grasped, but is always worth striving for. Pageau and Peterson then analyze the idea of goal setting. While they agree that setting goals is essential, they caution about the dangers of attaching ultimate fulfillment to these goals. Indeed, Peterson notes that the chase often provides more satisfaction than the achievement itself. Pageau stresses the importance of aligning goals with the notion of the higher ineffable good. Material goals, he notes, are fleeting and will not provide lasting fulfillment. Instead, goals that foster growth, love, and goodness that are aligned with this concept of a higher good offer a more fulfilling and meaningful life. As the riveting conversation further shifts toward Jonathan Pageau's perspective on imparting the importance of higher goods and virtues to children. Pageau, himself a father, explains that he imparted Christian values and virtues to his children not simply as a religious obligation, but as a way of life. Pageau insists that it's not just about preaching the importance of truth, but living it. Children learn more from observing their parents than lectures they receive. Mikhaila Peterson delves into the topic of anger when interacting with children. There's a concern that angry parenting might encourage children to lie to avoid punishment. On this point, Pageau emphasizes that anger has its place and advocates for it to be used as a rare but potent tool. A display of rare anger can have a resounding effect, signaling to a child that they've stepped far out of bounds. Its use, he suggests, should be more for immediate dangers that a child needs to be seriously wary of. In the latter half of this conversation, Pageau narrates the story behind his recently published illustrated book, a modern adaptation of the classic fairy tale, Snow White. Pageau's love of fairy tales began in his childhood, but it was his experience reading them to his own children that prompted him to write his own version of Snow White. His disappointment with modern, cynically twisted adaptations of fairy tales and the abandonment of these timeless stories by companies like Disney led him to develop his own representation. His aim was to celebrate these stories while providing layers of meaning for both children and adults to engage with. Pageau mentions a series of 8 fairy tales to follow, each with a narrative arc that will intertwine characters and recurring patterns, creating a rich tapestry of interconnected stories. The aim is to answer why these stories were loved in their time and foster a deeper appreciation for these timeless narratives. He concludes by touching on the origin of fairy tales and how they have been sanitized throughout the 19th century to appeal to changing societal sensibilities. Exploring deeply anchored patterns in fairy tales, Jonathan Pageau draws parallels between these stories and patterns found in religious narratives like the Old Testament. In his effort to rejuvenate these tales, Pageau endeavors to remain faithful to their original impact while discreetly incorporating modern context. Pageau's adaptation reintroduces elements typically edulcorated due to their potential shock value, such as explicit references to sexuality or transformations happening at puberty. He illustrates this point with Snow White's story, which at its core is about a young girl coming to terms with sudden changes and challenges brought about by puberty. Say Pageau criticizes modern fairy tales for trying to sanitize these references or cynically exaggerate them to match adult sensibilities. His intention is to integrate these elements subtly while making it clear that these stories deal with a multitude of complexities and are not solely focused on sexuality or power dynamics. In his reworkings, he seeks to highlight certain elements to draw gentle parallels with today's world. Pageau mentions how the originally handheld magic mirror in Snow White has been interpreted as a modern smartphone. However, he emphasizes that these modern parallels will not be explicitly stated or didactic, but hinted at subtly to add depth to the story. The conversation veers towards the impact of Disney's adaptations of these fairy tales. Pageau lauds Disney's initial efforts to preserve the balance and power of the classic tales, but criticizes their subsequent manipulation by ideology, which led to boring, uninspired stories. He extends his criticism to children's literature overall, which he opines has become riddled with incipient ideologies. Despite these criticisms, Pageau views these circumstances as an opportunity for captivating stories to stand out. He calls for need to not only criticize, but to take the mantle, learn, and tell these stories. He acknowledges the inherent truths and captivating mysteries in these tales, qualities that have made them lovable for centuries. Pageau observes that the truth behind these stories clashes with ideological expectations. Using J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series as an example, he describes the contradiction where people love the story for its fundamental humanistic patterns, but despise it for the same reasons when it doesn't align with their ideologies. Just like Snow White and Harry Potter, these timeless narratives capture significant human patterns and structures that resonate with readers universally. Pageau warns against the dullness that may taint these beloved stories if they are twisted to fit certain ideological beliefs or seen as mere propaganda. The richness of these stories comes from their inherent truths, not their alignment with transient ideologies. Continuing on, heroic tales like Star Wars suffer when their storylines are manipulated to fit into politically correct paradigms, often leading to audience disappointment. As Pageau notes, this incongruity happens when people love narrative for what it fundamentally is, but reject it when it doesn't resonate with a particular ideology. A notable question that's explored is the perception of popular books like Harry Potter, which has been considered evil by certain sections of religious groups due to its references to witchcraft. Pageau outlines how many critics often fail to see the narrative's broader theme of good versus evil. Looking at this from a broader perspective, he explains that most narratives, including famous works like J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, contain elements of magic and sorcery. To Pageau, the Christian objection to Harry Potter could stem from a misunderstanding of how magic is used. He distinguishes the magic in Lord of the Rings, which serves a higher purpose, from the magic in modern stories, including Harry Potter, which can oftentimes merely seem to serve personal will. Nevertheless, Pageau himself views the Harry Potter books as generally good stories. Further on, the discussion shifts to Halloween, which Pageau describes as an example of a festival of inversion. He explains how these festivals exist in every culture and act as a necessary release, an opportunity to temporarily allow chaos into the order of daily life. During these periods, social conventions are temporarily suspended or inverted, and people engage in activities, behaviors, and indulgences that aren't typically acceptable in everyday life. These days of disorder serve to act as a reference point for everyday normality when normal order is restored. Interestingly, Pageau points out that while these inversion festivals or carnivals serve a functional purpose in society, left unchecked or perpetuated beyond their term, they can lead to a level of societal dysfunction, which Pageau cheekily refers to as a clown world. The point being made is not to eschew pleasure and joy, but to collectively direct them towards higher goods and purpose, to avoid cycles of addiction and obsession. This brings the conversation full circle to the acceptance of such narratives, their patterns and interpretations within various communities, and the value of retaining their inherent societal messages rather than transforming them to serve particular ideologies. Continuing the conversation, Pageau dives deeper into his perspective on human pleasure and its connection to higher purpose. He uses an example of sex and relationships, highlighting that when these aspects of life are anchored in something meaningful, such as forming close bonds, starting a family, or creating a mini society, they provide a higher satisfaction and purpose. Conversely, disconnected and casual approach, like hookup culture, results in despair and loneliness in the long run. He asserts that every joy, when submitted to a higher ideal or purpose, becomes more fulfilling. Sharing a meal with friends, for instance, offers a deeper pleasure than consuming the best food alone out of sheer craving. Its paradox of pleasure is among the key points that Pageau shares with the audience. Suddenly, the conversation takes an unexpected turn when Mikhaila Peterson brings up the red pill community and the worrying trend she has noticed toward advocating polygamy. Interestingly, Pageau suggests that those advocating for polygamous relationships, essentially a master-servant dynamic, will theoretically find themselves gravitating toward faiths that permit such relationships, like Islam. On the contrary, Christian faith, which Pageau is firmly rooted in, views marriage as a unity between two individuals, akin to a spiritual dance between a person and God. This spiritual unity is intrinsically monogamous and resonates with the vision of equal and mutual love shared in a relationship, offering a counterargument to the prevalent red pill logic that equates male dominance with polygamy. Pageau points out that the most influential and long-lasting empires like Rome have been principally monogamous. He posits that a monogamous structure proves a stronger foundation to raise children, thus indirectly contributing to the West's global dominance. The humorous part, according to Pageau, is the overconfident males in these groups who imagine themselves at the top of these polygamous setups, unaware that they might possibly end up as the neglected part of such arrangements. After a spirited discussion, Mikhaila wraps up the conversation by expressing her excitement about Pageau's new books and thanking him. Conversations over the podcast, with their high degree of intellectual engagement and wide-ranging perspectives on some of today's most trending topics, provide the audience with significant and thoughtful content. The podcast continues to foster discussion and encourages its listeners to analyze societal perspectives critically. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of the Pod Slice.